Well, I'd say about 300 years ago when D'Iberville had encountered our tribal ancestors. They lived simple lives. They were hunters, fishermen. They gathered. They even raised crops. And being with the Choctaw, they were very self-governed. They took care of themselves and governed their people the best that they could to keep everyone safe. Um, and when D'Iberville came in, they encountered them, and they said they were some of the most friendly people that they've ever encountered because they were very open, come up and shook hands with them, and wanted to relate with them the best that they could. So, and I think that impressed the French very much. And one of the Frenchmen, John Baptiste Boudreaux de Gravelines, he settled into the area. He married in to the tribe, to the chief's daughter, the great chief's daughter, and they had two children, and that's where we descend from, is from his two children. Pascagoula, Capinan, Biloxi, Tunica, there were several, and they're all of the Choctaw nation, except a few of them that were just kind of the traders. But they were here along the rivers, and they all just traveled to each villages, and they traded with each other, hunted together, and traveled, intermarried. When the whites started coming in, they mostly, a lot of them moved out, and of course there was not tribal, but other Indian tribes would come in, and then they would just move out. They would relocate, but most of them, for our part with our people, they stayed in the area. They just married in with the French, and of course and they all just stayed isolated together. And what was the Pascagoula, the Capinan, and things, that's where we descend from. They usually, well, when they had the Removal Act, a lot of them that were removed, there was many more that stayed. They stayed, hid out and further up in the country, or along the river, down in the swamp areas and stuff, and just stayed. And they just worked really well with the French and whoever else was in the area of the European descent. They were really good at fishing, hunting. They eventually got into logging, to doing a lot of that, and coal burning. So they were, very diligent workers.
Come on down from there.
Okay, we've got the Gravelines, Bang, Waltman, Ladnier. There's many different names. Ely. They all married in to the tribal bloodline, and that's how we are now. They raised sheep. Of course, they would use the wool, make blankets, and they've traded with everybody. And of course, a lot of, they would learn things from our people, and we learn things from them, just to be able to survive, coincide with each other. Our children, our people weren't now allowed to go to the schools with the whites and the blacks. So eventually, the state of Mississippi Education said that these children were educatable, but they were not going to provide a schoolhouse for them. So my great-grandfather, Edward Bang, donated an acre of land, milled timber. They built the school, and they were also the trustees of the school when it first started, and it finally opened its doors in 1917, and that's where our parents attended. And they went to the school there because it was just for the native children. And of course, they were native in French. They called them Creole, which is a French word for native and French mix. So, but they were not allowed to attend a lot of the county fairs, go into public bathrooms or any of the public buildings and stuff. So they basically kept to themselves there in Vancleave, and there was 2 churches they attended because it was right there in their area, which was the Holiness Church and the Beulah Baptist Church, and that's where most of our people would go to worship. But they stayed isolated in Vancleave, and it was intertribal marriages. That's how our bloodline has stayed so strong throughout the generations now. Our French ancestor, he documented a lot of things, and of course the churches, them being French, they were also Catholic. And then when they married, these marriages were documented in the church records, and that's where a lot of our history comes from. And not a lot of tribes have that kind of documented history that ties their tribe, to actual documents. that they can support their claims with. So we were very lucky in that. Our grandfather Boudreaux, he owned a lot of the land there along the Pascagoula. He lived on Dauphin Island. He built a couple houses out there. He did introduce cattle to this area, some that were out of Cuba and some that were out of Canada. And he breeded them and made a very hardy stock for this area. So it's been a big journey learning all this history, because I started 34 years ago, and of course my cousin Steve Register and of course my cousin Terry Ladner, they've all contributed to our research to hopefully become federally recognized. All we can do is just keep our history alive, our language, and our way of surviving, and pass those down to the children, and so the future generations can know where they came from.